From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
House Republicans passed their bill to raise the debt limit along with some spending and other reforms, but President Biden says he still won't negotiate with Republicans over the debt limit. What's next in this fight? And who has the political leverage now? Plus, a disappointing report on first quarter GDP growth, only at 1.1%. Is this a sign of a greater slowdown or even a recession to come? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with my colleagues on the Wall Street Journal opinion pages, Mene Ukwe-Barua and Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. First big victory for Kevin McCarthy. Well, not the first legislative victory, but the first one which was really significant politically and was much doubted by many in the press corps, and I think hoped for failure by the White House, but he succeeded. 217 to 215 was the vote, passed with 4 Republican defections. But the conference held together. It would have been a disaster if it had not passed, because if it had not passed, then House Republicans would have had no leverage at all going into the debt ceiling debate, and the White House and the Senate would have cut their own bill and then tried to present it to McCarthy and the House Republicans as a fait accompli, the debt ceiling arriving maybe as soon as June. Let's listen to Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, talk about the vote.
He's putting the American economy in jeopardy by his lack of action. Now he should sit down and negotiate. We passed this early. We are in April, way ahead of the debt limit. We are the only party to take fiscal action in a sound mind that would lift the debt limit so we wouldn't have economic damage. We've also put us back on a path to end the Washington wasteful spending and to grow our economy and make us stronger.
The he in that clip, Kim, President Biden. So first of all, before we get to the president, how did Kevin McCarthy do this?
Well, first of all, I think he gets huge marks because one thing that people are forgetting too is that there are a lot of Republicans who are simply genetically opposed to ever voting to raise the debt ceiling.
Genetically, is that an imprint at birth, Kim? I think for some Republicans it is. You're right.
For some Republicans, and they view it as somehow signaling that they're in favor of more spending. And so historically, a lot of them were just always a hard no on this. So he had to get around that. He did. He managed to bring together these kind of 5 different caucuses within the Republican Party, including the House Freedom Caucus, which had come out of the gate very early and said that they wanted a far more aggressive package. They passed their own budget proposal, et cetera. I mean, part of that was designed to push McCarthy their way. But a lot of these guys, these are some of the folks that refused to agree to some of those speaker votes and to make McCarthy speaker. And so the fact that he did it with a lot of conversation, a lot of negotiations, he made everybody feel that they were part of the process, that everybody got a little bit of what they wanted. There was a last minute hiccup when he had to deal with some final demands from some Midwestern Republicans who wanted more ethanol tax credits, and then some in the conservative wing who wanted tougher work requirements. They managed to thread that needle. And as you could see from that vote total, it was very close. He did lose 4 members, which was the maximum he could lose, but he got him over the line. And now, as a result, the Republicans are unified. As he said, it's the only bill that actually addresses this problem at the moment. They're going to leave town at the end of the week. And basically, they've passed the ball over to Biden and to Schumer in the Senate and said, hey, your move now.
Mene, that closeness of the vote suggests the precarious nature of this Republican majority. You only have that 4-vote majority. And the guys who voted against it, Ken Buck, Colorado member, Matt Gaetz, Florida. I read that there's a couple of others. I read their statements, and I have to say, they're just so otherworldly, right? They say they don't cut spending enough, or it adds to the debt. Well, if you didn't pass this, you would have had more to the debt, and you wouldn't have been able to reduce spending at all.
Exactly. I think to Kim's point about the task that Kevin McCarthy had in rounding up all these different groups within the House Republican caucus, it's important to point out that he wasn't convincing members of the Freedom Caucus to vote for this bill merely because they need to save face and show that they have a united front. He actually did include quite a lot of serious fiscally conservative provisions in that bill. It is going to contain about $4.8 trillion of spending.
Savings, right?
Correct.
What would it be?
Compared with what the spending a projected over 10 years would have been without their cuts. It's also going to include those work requirements that were mentioned. And he was convinced by a lot of the more conservative members of his caucus to add repeal provisions of some of the spending passed in the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, those probably are not going to make it through any compromise that ends up being struck with the president and the Senate. But in terms of representing the party's priorities, Kevin McCarthy was really willing to give quite a lot to the conservative members of his own party. And so Buck, Gates, and some of the other objectors are clearly just taking a position, showing that they're unwilling to go along with anything that Speaker McCarthy is going to put forward. But the party is very united behind these principles, and they've made a strong first offer, which hopefully will be a prelude to having some of those provisions be preserved in final agreement.
Yeah, don't soft sell some of these reforms. I mean, a 1% growth rate in spending over 10 years, that would save $3.2 trillion estimated by CBO, that single provision, out of estimated spending over $60 trillion. I mean, these numbers are kind of crazy at this stage. But the point being, they're getting something significant here if they could get this. And the work requirements, I think, are actually very important, not just economically, but culturally, to get more people back into the workforce. The student loan, they would eliminate some student loan forgiveness, which the Supreme Court may help them on. But these are no small things, Kim, and you only control one house of one part of the government. You're not going to get everything you want, but this is not a bad opening offer.
That's what really strikes me, is that this is a very sensible offer. If you think about what some in the party were demanding, I mean, a balanced budget in 10 years, to do that, you would essentially, you'd have to cut so deep that you really would risk a backlash. And you can't even necessarily do it unless you have the courage to address some of these out of control entitlements that are on autopilot. Nobody in the Republican caucus really wants to go there just right now. And so what McCarthy did, I think, is to, again, canvass all the groups, find out their top priorities, include a lot of in there, while also making the argument that we're not going to get everything here and we have to look reasonable. This needs to be a reasonable offer. One thing that also strikes me is there's a lot in here that I think was put in largely so that the terms of the debate or in the discussion when they go into negotiation are one in which the White House can claim it gets something back, claws something back, so that this package ends up being smaller. So they did go big here in the beginning in terms of a lot of different provisions and things. I have no doubt that McCarthy has a more bottom line on what he really wants to see in a final package. I'm sure he's had those discussions with his members, but that's still going to be the really tricky part here, is that if Biden does agree to sit down with him, this is not going to be what the GOP gets. Okay, there's going to be a negotiation. Now, at that point, do his members realize that they're going to have to give something as well in a final deal?
Yeah, we'll have to see, and I want to elaborate on that a little bit more. But Monet, the other thing that's striking to me about this bill is that the reform provisions that are in it, if you look at the public opinion polling, the public favors them. They're not saying entitlement cuts. They're not saying things that would be easy for the administration to demagogue. Work requirements in return for welfare benefits are actually popular. Maybe not with the Democratic base, but the public likes them. Controlling the growth of spending after the big COVID blowouts is popular.
Yeah, 100%. I do think that Republicans know that they're playing with a strong hand here in terms of the merits of their quests. And again, it's possible that they're going to have to amend some of them when it comes time to sit down with President Biden and with the Senate. But very clearly, the basic outline of what they're requesting in return for raising the debt ceiling is very, very reasonable. But I frankly think that Democrats are counting on the press to have their back as usual. The press tends to put the blame for teetering on the brink of default in the hands of Republicans. Democrats are able to say, we just want a clean increase. We don't want anything attached to it. And they know that they're going to have a lot of reporters carrying their water and selling that message. And so it is an open question of who's going to look worse if we end up getting close to that debt limit coming down the line. But if you look at the pure merits, I think the Republicans should feel very confident about selling their position to the public.
On your point about the press, most of the coverage that I saw on this would kind of grudgingly said, well, yeah, they passed it, but now increasing the likelihood of a default.
Right.
So let me get this straight. The bill that passes that actually raises the debt ceiling increases the chances of defaulting. I mean, it's just very, very strange logic, Monet.
Absolutely. And I've also seen a lot of the commentary on the House bill saying Republicans took months and had to work to build a consensus, and it shows that they're not willing to actually negotiate. But in the end, they got there, which certainly is more than Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer can say at this point. They haven't presented an alternative, and so Republicans clearly have the upper hand and have done the most to actually take a step toward avoiding a default.